Hello again, and welcome to a new episode of the KewCast. I'm John, and I'm joined again by my good friend Eddie. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, John. Doing better than you?
Yes, you are. Last week, I was doing better than you.
Yes.
I think we're passing around some illnesses. So.
Oh, my God.
But you know what? The show must go on.
It does. It shall.
It always goes, yes. With or without us. I don't know how that happened, but I'd like to think it would. But we got a fun show today, Eddie. So we're going to talk about some latest news, including our trip to Austin last week, which was a blast. I'm sure everybody's been listening to the Pickleball Studio and Pickleball Effect and Pursuit and all the other guys that were there. But we'll have our own take on it, you and me. Other news, and then we're going to get into a big issue that I think not really anybody's talking about, which are the tariffs and what are their effects going to be on paddle prices.
Whatever it is, buy your stuff now before everything kicks in.
Probably.
Including your phone if you need a replacement.
And then paddles of the week. This week we're going to talk about the Diadem Blue Foam and the bread and butter Filth and the new shapes. And then we're also going to look at the Vatic Saga 14 millimeter.
Yeah, it's a good week.
Yeah. And then kind of a deep dive, not so much the ball cannon this week, but we're going to talk about new paddle break-in regulation put out by PPL Labs for UPAA. Some really interesting stuff there, and 2 new studies published by PPL, which I think everybody will be interested in, especially me. I love the studies. I love the bar charts. So maybe other people share my interest. Then Q&A. All right, Eddie.
That's a great show.
That's a great show. Let's jump into it. All right, so latest news in gear gossip. We do have a sponsor this week for this segment, which is our favorite eyewear, Briotti Eyewear. You and I have been wearing them for a good while. They have one frame right now, which is the Focus, but they have several lenses. And what we love about them, I think you and I have talked about it, is kind of the color manipulation that they've put in research into. So they have the Augment 4D shade, which is their outdoor shaded lenses. They just provide like this panoramic, high definition view of the pickleball court. And even for me, being a colorblind person, the blues and the yellows really pop. And by yellow, I mean whatever color the ball is, including green for me. But that helps out enormously because you get this contrast of the ball coming at you. And it's
like
not
a targeting system, man. You see the yellow ball in your frame of view. It's just boom. It just jumps right out.
Yeah, exactly. So love those. And then the other lenses I've been using recently are the Dinkum Plus, which are basically their lenses, but they do have a little bit of blue blocking on them. And I'm able to use those. Normally I can only use totally clear lenses on some indoor courts if the lighting's a little low. Any kind of shading, just I can't see the ball very well. This I'm able to use just fine. So that the Dinkum Plus. So the lenses do change out. They have a little latch where you can, actually ventilate your glasses if they start fogging up, which is really rare unless you're just like in a really humid, sweaty climate. And the ventilation does work. I've used it before. Just fantastic glasses. They're $214. You can take 10% off with the code Johnkew.
And is that with 2 lenses or just the one?
Just one lens,
okay.
Yeah.
It's worth getting a couple, though, because they do provide performance in different environmental conditions.
I forgot to look at the lenses prices, but yeah, they're fantastic lenses, all of their varieties.
Briotti, good stuff.
Yeah, you've been loving them for a while now.
Oh yeah, and like I was saying, I wasn't able to wear them for a long time because I was wearing prescription sunglasses, and these aren't prescribable. But now that I'm back in contact lenses, I'm just thrilled to be wearing these again.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, thanks, Briotti.
Yep.
Eddie, let's talk about our Austin trip last week. We did a lot in Austin.
Oh, man.
And even more after you left. It was a fun
All the good
trip.
stuff happens after I leave.
Right.
Let's save it up for when Eddie's gone.
So the real reason we went, the primary reason, what brought us there was the Adidas paddle event. So they're launching their new metal bone, their revised metal bone. We got to hit with that. We are under an agreement, an NDA of sorts, to not discuss details about the event or the paddles, how they hit, but I think they're coming out tomorrow. I definitely want to have my review up. I'm going to do a first impression probably early next week on these paddles. But it was great to meet the team. I will say, I think we can talk about the team because they're not paddle related, but yeah, good people on that team, and I think their head is in the right spot, and they'll be moving Adidas as a paddle company in a better direction than it has been in the past.
What was very clear to me is they bring a lot of history and experience in sports equipment manufacturing to pickleball. Something, a lot of, fly-by-night, smaller pickleball companies don't have. They don't have that discipline. They don't have the logistics. They don't have a lot of things that Adidas does have, obviously. And it's really interesting to see that particular aspect of the sport kind of coming to the forefront.
Yeah. And they're one of the big companies in padel, and the Metal Bone has padel aesthetics. The newer ones, as people will see tomorrow, aren't as padel looking as the first iteration of the Metal Bone. But I think having that padel background is both a hindrance and a benefit for them. And I think they're moving past the hindrance part of that and into the benefit, because, padel paddles and pickleball paddles aren't the same thing.
Right.
And they behave differently, they're used differently. But I think there's some institutional knowledge there that will be important for their new pickleball paddle line. So thanks for that trip. We'll talk more about it openly next week after the embargo is lifted. But while we were there, Eddie, we also did quite a fun little tournament.
Oh my gosh.
Battle.
That was nuts.
Whatever you want to call it. It was hosts versus co-hosts. And I've been so busy lately. I wasn't really involved in the lead up to it. And we've got this group chat, and you're not on it, but it's me and Chris and Braden and Justin and Lewis, and they kind of set everything up, and I was kind of paying attention a little bit, and then I thought originally it was just going to be like podcast versus podcast, and it became clear it was host versus co-host, and we did like an MLP style format. We did this at the lab, so this indoor one-court facility that facilitates pros and training and all this. Fantastic facility, by the way. Love that place, love the ownership, and we were lucky to be able to use it. But it all just came together perfectly, where it was a great facility. There were great people. So the owners of the lab, as well as Johnson Cola. Thankfully, most of the big pros left and didn't have to watch our play, right? So when we came on, it was Zane and, God, who were the other three players?
I didn't recognize them.
It was Colin Johns on
Was
one
that
team.
him? Okay.
Yeah. And I forget the other two guys, but it was obviously pro level, high level pickleball, and we're all like setting up cameras. We're like, God, if they stick around and they watch us.
It was nerve-wracking enough for me just to be with you guys, much less them hanging around. It's like, oh my God, this is mind-blowing.
That was a nervous wreck too. But anyway, what are your thoughts before we get into kind of what happened in we're not going to give any spoilers or anything, but what are your thoughts about meeting the other people again?
Oh, just such a great group of guys. I mean, probably people I would want to call friends, even if there was no pickleball involved. Just fun to hang out with. Mm-hmm. Speaking of being a blast, I was kind of sick during this trip, and I don't know if you knew this, but everybody was gathered there at the lab when I walked in. They had already kind of started the proceedings. I wasn't feeling well that morning, but I came in, and immediately had to go to the bathroom. So I'm like, "Hey guys, I'll be back." So
and he's in the house, and I'm gone.
So got that over with, and then I came back to the group, and then 30 seconds after that, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I was in the bathroom again. So it was quite the blast.
This junk, whatever we have,
it is terrible.
It is nasty. I was out of it this last weekend, and it's been like 5 solid days of sickness. I'm on the mend. But anyway,
it's just weird. Like I'd have energy for 1 second, and then it would just like completely leave my body, and I'd just be wanting to lie down somewhere. But
you did zero complaining. I thought not even anybody really knew you were sick. You're coughing here and there, but I was like, Eddie's pretty dang sick. I would not have been able to do anything feeling the way I do.
Just the excitement of being in the group, I think, got me through it.
Everybody loved seeing you, man. Because you had been to one event in Dallas last year where you met Chris and Braden and Isaac. Yep. Did you meet Isaac at that trip?
I did, yeah, first time.
You and Isaac hit it off really well this trip.
Isaac's such a cool guy. He's like a younger version of myself, like into all these like obscure things. I would consider them obscure, maybe not so much, but he's got like a martial arts background, bowling,
Professional
darts. Like he's just a man of like many interests, and that's kind of how I am.
Yeah, it's true.
He's fun. He's a good guy.
Little things you never knew about Eddie suddenly come out like, oh, I'm proficient on a unicycle.
On the other hand, Chris is one-dimensional. just lobs.
They're gonna love that so much. They got such a kick out of you like calling out Chris because he lobbed you a few times during play, and then we went to this event later for Adidas.
I cannot track those things down right now. It's not gonna
really. I
happen.
think you do really well. You're fleet of foot, Eddie, but you made a joke at a ping pong table. Like, Chris, why aren't you lobbing here? Huh? And they just thought it was hilarious.
Really good time though, and the MLP style event was just a lot of fun.
100%, like that. And thank you so much to Pickleball Studio, both Chris and Isaac, for taking on the editing of that, because we had plenty of cameras. I only set up one camera, and I put it on the people on the sidelines,
Oh, that was okay. I was
cheering.
wondering where yours were set up.
Yeah, but there were like 12 cameras, and every one of us had a lapel mic, and everything was just dumped onto this hard drive afterwards. And I was like, I am glad I am not dealing with that. Like, that is going to be such a mess.
Please say it's not going to be shown in its entirety.
So the goal is, I think the plan is, each one of our channels that we're competing are going to post one of the games. MLP style games, and then it did go to Dreambreaker. We can say that the Dreambreaker is going to be back on Pickleball Studio. So it'll start on Pickleball Studio and end on Pickleball Studio. I mean,
Folks,
honestly,
don't worry about watching that one, guys.
don't give it away. I mean, I can say the same thing, but honestly, if I have to post the game that I played horribly on my channel, and just be like, why? Why bother? Just post it on your channel, Chris. There was one game where I just played like total garbage.
That wasn't against me because you played great against me.
I don't know about that.
No, that you were with. Were you with Chris that game?
No, it's me and Braden.
You and Braden.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me and Braden, we got to figure out our energy together. Like we get along so well on and off the court, but on the court it's just like neither one of us. Like we don't have synergy yet on the court, and we got to develop.
He's an amazing player.
Oh yeah.
I mean, all the guys are. To be honest, I'm probably the lowest duper in the entire group, and it definitely shows. But man, those guys are good.
And you met Lewis and Justin from Pickleball Pursuit.
Yep.
Good guys, right?
And JJ on day one.
Yep.
Although he didn't play in the group game, but
And Rafa, Pickleball Tech dude,
Brian
was there on the sideline, and Brian Lim. So Brian Lim filled in for Kyle.
Gotcha.
Which was Pickleball Effect podcast. And that was so much fun. I just
when you're healthy and I'm healthy and there's money on the line, we'll do it again.
They're already talking about a rematch.
Okay, good.
It'll surprise me. And it's going to be fun because there was a lot of banter and chatter, and everybody was mic'd up. So if that alone, it's just going to be fun for people to watch. And the format, the MLP style format, was a lot more fun. It did get really competitive, but it wasn't as competitive, I think, as the last kind of matchup where, I forget where they met, but it was like Pickleball Studio and Pickleball Effect had this battle. And that was like seriously intense. And so this is going to be a lot more lighthearted. So
you know these guys, you've played with them before. I haven't, but did anything take you by surprise?
Good question. Lewis played out of his mind for what, I'm not going to say which games, but a couple of the games. Justin, I knew, was a great player. Do you know their dupers are below a 4.0?
I can't believe that. That's
so deflated. They're right there with me at least, right? Anyway, the game I played horribly on, Justin also played incredibly on. And,
solid. He was solid all day.
Yeah, so he got me several times. I played, that's going to be a bad game. But overall, just so much fun. I wouldn't give any spoilers, so I'm not going to chat too much about it unless you have other impressions, Eddie. Perfect. We got more news to cover, Eddie, so why don't we jump into the Leigh-Waters and Catherine Parento split up. I think most people have already covered this, but I thought we'd kind of give our impressions. My main takeaway is at first I was just like, I'm kind of bummed out.
Why?
That they split up because they were such seemingly good friends. I think they were, legitimately. And Anna Bright and Rachel Rohrbacher split up because they were a lot of fun to see together and that synergy and relationship. But I totally get it from Anna Leigh's perspective. I mean, the smartest thing about it is she's eliminating their main opponents, right? She's absorbing their main opponents that have beat them the most, right? So now that she split up Anna Bright and Rachel Rohrbacher, and Anna Bright, people aren't going to want to pick on her as much as they did Catherine. Catherine's an amazing player, total sweetheart, but she was getting picked on too much in that pairing, and it's not going to be as fun to target Anna Bright and Leigh-Waters and Anna Bright.
What do you think Anna brings that Catherine maybe does not? I mean, power is the first thing that comes to my mind, but what are you seeing?
Yeah. More offense, for sure, and just grit. Man, Anna Bright hates to lose. Not that Catherine does, but I think she's mentally tougher, One of the mentally toughest people on the tour,
She's also 5 or 6 years younger than Catherine.
Yeah.
That's got to play a role in this.
Yeah, for sure. And those two are going to be they're so hard for everybody to...
Can you think of a duo that's going to topple them fairly
Not
soon?
easily. Not easily. Maybe not even soon. I mean, I think their main opponents right now are going to be Tyra Black and Georgia Johnson, And they're kind of... Georgia's game is a little bit up and down. And when she's on, she can beat anybody in the world. And clearly they showed that last time by beating ALW and Catherine. But I think there's going to be work for them to do to level the playing field like they did on the last game,
Now, Georgia and Anna Leigh, that would be an interesting duo.
Yeah, for sure. Or Tyra Black and Anna Leigh. I was wondering why she didn't go with Tyra. Tyra's got a crazy high ceiling also.
Yeah.
But I get it. Anna Bright, totally dominant, and that's probably the best pick for Anna Leigh-Waters. And it's a smart pick, Like I said, she took a page out of Ben John's book when he brought on Gabe Tardio. That's his biggest opponent, gave him the most problems. Now they team up and they dominate,
So do you think secretly Catherine and Rachel, they're okay with this? They could still be friends, but maybe not? Or
I'm sure Catherine's bummed out, but she's got to understand deep down somewhere, It's not about, are we the best friends on the tour? It's about what's the best pairing for us to be able to perform our best. And I have to agree with Anna Leigh-Waters' team that Anna Bright was an excellent tip. And same for Anna Bright. I think she's been getting a lot of heat for splitting up with Rachel. She's got to do what's the best for her. I do kind of don't like it. I feel like Anna Bright should be a star on her own team, and she was getting there with Rachel. But they were still, it wasn't an easy ride for them, and it wasn't even level yet. They beat them a few times, ALW and Catherine, but it wasn't by any means a given. So, even though I'd like to see Anna Bright as the star, she's going to be kind of in Anna Leigh-Waters' shadow. Maybe she'll come into her own and just develop these. She's already just a total sweetheart, not on the court. She's a vicious competitor on the court, but everybody loves Anna Bright off court as well. Super smart person, really engaging. But maybe she'll develop this on court persona that will, bring people to her and make her the star of that show.
So how does that happen? Is it a text message?
What's that?
I'm done with you, Catherine.
Oh.
Hit the road.
I think I heard that.
You
I
get
heard
the
Catherine,
managers involved.
Yeah, I heard Catherine say that ALW called her.
Okay.
But she had no idea. Oh. Apparently, Anna Bright kind of knew for a little while, but she couldn't spill the beans. So, yeah.
Breaking up is hard to do, John.
Breaking up.
Been meaning to talk to you about the podcast.
No, you can't.
Okay.
It's just not an option. Okay. Shall we move on to... I got one more little thing here in news. So, Pickleball Central, I did have a code with them, Johnkew, and still have an affiliate code. So they've eliminated just the ability to enter a code at checkout because it's hard to track those. They end up on coupon websites and that sort of thing. So now it's just by affiliate link only. So I'll put the affiliate link in the description, but it's really easy to remember. So it's pickleballcentral.com/Johnkew, Johnkew. And when you go to that, anything you put in your basket, it will apply my discount. You can get the biggest percentage off of whatever it applies to in your cart. So it doesn't apply to everything. So for example, sometimes Yola doesn't allow on most of their products any kind of discount code, so you can't use it on that. But anything that it does apply to, it will automatically apply to whatever you have in your basket, and you'll get the best discount on that. They're also coming up with like a points system where, if you buy something, you get points, and you can redeem those points as cash in the Pickleball Central store. And that's a pretty generous,
That's been around for a little bit now.
Has it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's about 4%.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a decent chunk of change. So, 10% discount or so plus the 4%, that gets you a bigger discount than what you get at most.
Man, Pickleball Central I have been working with them since I started playing pickleball, and this was 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, they were a nothing company back then, but their customer service, their responsiveness, even like weird requests like I want a paddle that's exactly 8.2 ounces.
Oh, really?
They will help you out with that. At least they have in the past, and they're just a great company.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they got this worked out for you, because I had tried to use your code a couple times, and it gave me some like obscenely small discount.
Okay.
Like 0.05% or something.
I think if the code doesn't apply to the item, it gives like a 1 cent discount or something. That's what it used to do, but I think they've kind of updated everything.
Gotcha.
So. But yeah, you've always been a big advocate of Pickleball Central. I think that's where you mostly shopped before.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to our next segment. This is not any particular segment we usually do, but I wanted to discuss tariffs. And we're in a trade war with China right now. It's a pretty big deal. And
what is it today?
I heard 245.
Okay.
But
what the heck?
Yeah. Anyway, so it is affecting our paddle industry, like almost across the board. There are only a couple of larger U.S. only companies, U.S. made and U.S. sourced companies, but as we'll talk about in a second, it's probably going to even affect them. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to happen because, yes, we're in this trade war. Maybe things will de-escalate. Maybe they'll escalate. We don't know, but somebody needs to talk about this because it's going to have big implications on our paddle purchases.
I was wondering about that because, a lot of stuff is sourced from China, if not the final product, certainly component parts.
Yeah.
So this is going to hit all of our pocketbooks.
Yeah, for sure. So, there's a 145% tariff on goods imported from China right now. What that's going to translate to, and I talked to a couple of paddle companies. I'll keep them anonymous, but one is a large company and one's a medium-sized company. Got their input, and they both agreed that about $50 per paddle is what the tariff price will be, bringing each paddle into the U.S. Now, that's more than the wholesale to the paddle companies. That's more than the price of the paddle that they're paying. A lot more, probably about double, right? For some paddles, for not the crazy fancy ones, but your average paddle is about $25, $30.
You said $50 on top of whatever they're paying now for wholesale.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. And before anybody was like, wait a second, they're only paying $30 per paddle. Why are they charging $150 or whatever? There's a lot more that goes into it. There's shipping, there's R&D, there's QC, there's marketing, and they're not making gigantic profit margins. I've seen or I've discussed in great detail with some brands like what they're doing, and some of the budget brands are barely making any profit at all on their paddles, and they're banking on selling lots of those paddles to make their profits.
I think the common assumption is that that's not the case.
Right.
That the materials involved in making a paddle are fairly cheap. Therefore, the companies must be just raking it in on every paddle.
That is not true. That is not true at all. And as we'll talk about also in a second, thermoforming is an incredibly laborious process. You and I watched a video that Bablot showed us of their factory in China, or the factory in China that services them. And my God, the one person works on one paddle, just putting patches of carbon fiber here and there. I mean, it's incredibly complex, and it probably, it has to take them 30 minutes or an hour to get just the thing ready to put into the mold. And then there's a bunch of other stuff on top of that. So it's not like, they're just, you kind of see these videos of these big slabs of carbon fiber with polypropylene center and these saws just ripping out paddles. You're like, wait, that's how easy it is to make a paddle. No, it's not. The premium paddles are a lot of work. All right, so if we go back, if we assume $50 per paddle on average, and we assume they only pass on that price of just the tariff to the consumers, and we'll talk about in a second why it's probably going to be additional costs unrelated or related to the tariff on top of the tariff. But if we're only looking at $50, which is going to be minimal, and again, this is still up in the air. Things could cool off, things could heat up, this could change any second, but it would cost $150, obviously, for the 11624 Jelly Bean. $100 paddle goes up to $150. But I want to name off a few others here just to kind of give a more nuanced idea. So $190 for the Neonic Flare Prime X. That seems, wow, that's a big price increase. $205 for the Honolulu J2K. $220 for the 11624 Power Series. $250 for the 6-0 Ruby. $280 for the Franklin C45. $300 for the Selkirk Lux. $325 for the Gearbox Pro Ultimate. And $330 for the Yola Perseus 4, Carbon True Foam Genesis, and the Proton Flamingo. These are three very popular paddles. And then $383 for the Selkirk Labs 007, for example. So we're getting up.
So that's just $50 on top of whatever
exactly
their current retail price. It's not a sliding scale or anything like that.
No. So just to give everybody an idea, that's pretty significant. Bump, right? Like nobody's really paying in the upper 300s right now for paddles, or even above 300. Sometimes people will buy Selkirk Labs, but it's not their most biggest seller.
Remember when the Selkirk Labs first introduced themselves at $333, people were going nuts.
Yeah, right.
And now 300 might be fairly commonplace.
Yeah, and above. But that's assuming that, yes, they're just passing on that $50, but there will be additional costs if things go according to how they look like they're going to go. So this relates to various things. So for example, probably not many people are going to be buying as many paddles as they were if the prices go up, right? So if demand goes down, then there's less freights shipping over from China, and then shipping costs will increase. And if not as many paddles are being ordered, you get sort of this economy of scale where the factories in China charge per paddle according to these brackets. So if you order 100 or more, you get charged this amount. If you order 1,000 or more, you get charged this amount. 10,000, probably the biggest orders. Really small amounts per paddle because of this economy of scale. Well, if you're not able to order 10,000 or more anymore because the people aren't buying as many paddles, so you're going to go into a lower bracket, which costs more. So those price increases are going to be passed on to the consumer. And there's probably half a dozen other things I can't think of right now that are also going to slightly increase the price per paddle. So $50 right now seems to be a minimum price increase for the paddles.
That's difficult to swallow, John.
It is. Yeah. One question I want to kind of ask you, and we can discuss, is will larger brands or smaller brands be more affected by the tariffs? And I can see kind of something on both sides of this.
Well, I think by what you just said, it seems like the larger companies would be able to survive this weather a little bit more readily.
Yeah.
But what's your argument for the small company?
Well, the smaller companies are still going to be the cheapest companies, some of them, the 11624s, the Vatics.
But they've got such small buying power.
They've got such small buying power, and like I mentioned earlier, they're making razor thin
Right.
profit margins, and their success as a business relies on selling a certain amount of paddles, a large number of paddles. So if overall demand goes down and they're selling fewer paddles, we may see some of these really small companies go out of business. They just can't afford to be in business anymore, or hope to raise their price and make up for it. But then they're getting into the next tier of paddles, So, that's kind of my thought on it. But overall, I think if they're established smaller companies and they're popular, doing well, and continue to innovate and produce good products, then I think they have staying power and they may actually be advantageous at that lower price point, you know.
I wonder though if the larger companies, the ones that diversify into other product areas such as apparel, shoes, bags, and that kind of thing that may come from other countries, might be able to fare this a little bit better.
Yeah.
And perhaps maybe they're not making a lot of money on their paddles, but they can sort of leverage their presence in that market to
That's a good point.
Make up for it in other areas.
Yeah, totally. I mean, for the larger companies, I think they're going to be hit a little harder because, you know, are people going to be willing to pay over $300 for a Perseus 4?
It's a great question for the comments. Would love to hear from folks. Like,
Right.
you know, how would this affect their buying habits?
Yeah.
For the latest, greatest tech. I think, you know, when you're at 150, 200, yeah, it's okay. I'll buy another paddle.
Yeah.
But at 250, 300, I think you're going to think twice about that.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings us to the next topic is, will U.S. brands, U.S.-made paddles, so Paddletech and Engage are the two biggest, will they also be affected? Now, Paddletech and Engage are sourced and made in the USA, so, you know, they'll be fine there. But I can't imagine a world in which some of their equipment in their factories wasn't produced in China, you know, the rubber matting, you know, in their factories, et cetera. So there's going to be some items that are going to be more expensive for even
So do
these
they
companies.
truly, like, it's 100% American sourced? Like the grips and the edge guard, everything is...
That's a good question. I had reached out to Paddletech. I haven't heard back from them, but I imagine there's probably, you know, like you said, the edge guards are probably a likely candidate for being, you know, sourced in China.
Packaging material.
Yeah. I mean, China has much more lax regulations when it comes to toxic plastics, you know, than the U.S. So most of our plastic stuff comes over from China. Yeah.
Looking at the Thompson paddle up there, that's U.S. made, right?
Yep. Oh, by the way, Thompson sent me a new paddle.
Oh, great.
And they fixed the grip and they updated some stuff.
Different
listened
shape?
To, I think it's I don't know. I'll get back to you on that. But it's upstairs. We'll go take a look at it after this.
Right.
But I'm excited to test that out. So anyway, there's all that. Now, yes, China is the center of where you can manufacture a paddle. It's the easiest place to source that, to outsource that, and to get paddles made. But, you know, the question arises, all right, well, aren't there other Asian companies that are adjacent to China or in that region who could also, did I say companies? Or countries, Asian countries who could also do this. And yes, you know, I'm sure like in Vietnam, several other countries in the region could do this, but they don't yet have quite the infrastructure, so it would take some time. They'd also have to go through the same QC learning curve that we saw in China, right? And we're still going through it in China, but man, that would stink to have to go back to the old original thermoform days, and suddenly your thermoform paddle is hitting like a rocket ship. Anyway, it's going to be difficult. And it'll take time, right? Same for bring your manufacturing to the U.S. You know, I think there's only like one factory in the U.S. that does thermoforming. You know, certainly we could build those factories, but that's going to take some time. And if you're looking at a thermoform paddle, I think it's still going to be cheaper to manufacture those in China, given the labor costs.
And pay the tariff.
Than to hire American workers to spend an hour on wrapping each paddle and plus putting it in the mold and everything else. So I think in the end it's going to cost $500 a paddle, you know, instead of $300. So that's not a valid option. Last thing I kind of want to talk about here is that, you know, nobody's raised their prices yet. And I think it's because no company wants to be the first to do it. Now, eventually, it's going to happen. So, you know, these tariffs are already in place. It's already affecting our paddle industry. But, you know, I think it's kind of sit and wait right now, and nobody wants to be known as the first one to kind of be like, yeah.
There's all kinds of timing issues too, right? Yeah. I mean, you have to. These tariffs have been all over the place, up and down, here one day, gone the next, and so there's some strategy to just waiting it out a little bit, seeing where it all lands.
Yeah.
When do the tariffs when are they applied? When the product is landed here in the United States as an import?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know for sure, but that's my hunch. Yeah, and it's all kind of chaotic right now. But it's bound to happen sooner or later unless something changes for the better or for the worse,
I think Big Pickleball needs to petition for an exemption. I mean, certain consumer electronics have reached that point. Why not pickleball?
Yeah, right. Computers, cell phones, they don't have tariffs, but paddles do.
This is a crazy situation.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of raise the issue and get people prepared for things are probably going to be changing and not for the benefit of the consumer or the paddle companies, right? It's not fun for anybody.
Yeah, I think that we will see some interesting aftershocks to this. Mm-hmm. People being very careful about what they purchase, whereas these days it's not uncommon for somebody to just buy 2, 3, 4 paddles in a couple of months, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But that mentality sort of fades. Yeah, at $200, $300.
Yeah, even if I had the money, I don't want to have a $300 per month paddle budget.
Yeah, we might see not a resurgence, but a surgence of the used market. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. All right, Eddie. Should we move on? Next segment?
Yeah.
Let's go to
POTW.
Yes. Let's talk about some fun stuff. Get away from the doldrums.
No more International Economics Day.
Right. All right. So we've been a little remiss, Eddie, in talking about the Diadem blue foams. We've had them for a while. Everybody else has too, and everybody's chatting about them. But I'd like to get our perspective on this. You and I have had a chance to hit with them over the past couple of weeks. And we have 2 shapes. Did you bring
I did. I have this.
The fat boy.
What is this? 20 millimeters? 19 millimeters?
Yeah. So these are the only 2 shapes that Diadem sent, and I'm asking. I'm going to reach out to them, see if they can send more. I should have put in my notes exactly what shapes they have and options.
They're calling this the standard shape. A bit shorter handle, a fairly long face. They're the same width, the 2 paddles that we have here.
And it's confusing. It's not a standard shape in the sense of being not elongated. They're both elongated.
But look how thick that is.
But yeah, that one is a tricore, so it's layered. It has aramid, honeycomb in the center, and then foam on both sides. And this is all foam. This one here. So that's
a 14 mil.
14 millimeter Warrior, and everybody else has talked about this also, but they have the clear butt caps. You can actually pry them out with a small flathead screwdriver.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
A little bit of tungsten putty in there if you like a little weight in the bottom.
And you can see some of that aramid on this one.
Yes. And they've come out and said that this foam is expanded polypropylene, so we know what it is. For example, we don't know exactly what true foam is. It's similar to expanded polypropylene, but different. They don't cut out the recesses or voids.
Just a solid sheet.
It's a solid sheet. I haven't x-rayed these, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. One of the things I do love about these paddles is the edge guard. And a lot of people have been having issues with the edge guard, and Diadem just reached out to all of us reviewers and said, we're listening to you. We are going to make a tweak before the production models go out so that the edge guards will allow tungsten to be stuck more easily onto them, and lead, etc. You, however, you put tungsten and lead all over this sucker, and it sticks just fine.
And it's been on there for quite some time.
Okay.
There's several hours of play on there with that tungsten tape, and I had no problem of fixing it, and it has not come off.
But the best way to describe these edge guards, they're not as plasticky and more rubbery, and they're a little bit slick kind of to the touch, but I love the feel of them, like when you tap paddles.
No, it's got a nice, softer feel than what you might be used to.
Yeah, and I just find myself on the court like digging my thumbnail into the edge guard, just because it's very pleasing.
They feel very durable too. I mean, rubbing them on the ground, I think it's not going to have much effect on this.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to scratch as easily. I don't know. Time will tell. Maybe they'll chunks will come out of it more than, I don't know. I'm just trying to guess what might be a drawback for this, but I can't think of any. But
so that was a concern that the tungsten wasn't sticking?
Yeah.
I did give it a good alcohol cleaning. I mean, these tend to feel a little bit oily.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yep.
And stripping that off, I think, probably helped the adhesion.
So you do some alcohol, cotton swab?
Yeah.
Good idea. That's probably why it adhered. But moot point, because they will be changing the formula so it's less greasy. But it's apparently still going to be as rubbery. But I think this also, I mean, it almost looks like an edgeless paddle. I love how low profile the edge guard is. And I think the rubberized edge guard adds to the pleasant feel of the paddle. It takes away some of the harsher vibrations. And yeah, so let's jump into the feel of the paddles.
I think Amazing pretty well covers it.
So you like them?
I do. They've got a nice, like, on drives and serves, a really nice plush, I hate to say this again, but buttery feeling. I mean, just stroking that ball feels so good. I mean, not a huge amount of power. I wouldn't call this a power paddle. Maybe sneaking up on it a little bit on the high end of all court.
14.
This is the 14. But just really nice feel, dwell. I think it's all there.
Yeah. So I'll start with the 19 first, since I played with that last week and we just swapped earlier today. But I enjoyed this. It's definitely not close to a power paddle. I'd put it right in the middle of all court, probably. Maybe
the 19.
The 19.
Okay.
And like I said, the core is comprised of 3 layers, like a layer cake. So you have the full expanded polypropylene foam on the outer edges, and in the center you have Aramid honeycomb. Now I was worried about that originally because I've never liked the way Aramid cores play. They're stiff and tingy and just really harsh. I don't feel like this has any Aramid in it at all. The foam on the exteriors completely mitigates any feel of Aramid. Now, maybe, I don't know why they put the Aramid in there. Maybe it adds a little bit of punch or something. I don't know. But I don't mind it. I don't mind the Aramid being in there. It plays really well. I do get concerned with the layer cake approach to building cores, because when you, in the past, so like when they had the polypropylene on the outside and the Aramid in the center, there have been disbonding issues with the Warrior, with the Pro Line, Pro Power, whatever that was. Any ones that have the 3 layup were prone to breaking in that way. So in other words, those layers coming unglued from each other, and you get this hollow sound, and it either totally kills the paddle in terms of power, or it goes the opposite direction and becomes a cannon, right? So, you know, I'm a little worried with that. Part of the reason for that disbonding is because when you're taking a honeycomb and gluing it to another piece of honeycomb, the cells don't line up and you don't get as much surface area for the glue to adhere to. That might be partially fixed with the full foam in this case, because you do have a bigger surface to adhere to. So we'll see. We'll wait and see if these have any issues with disbonding, but that might be something to keep an eye out for. I do like how they tapered, so you can, I don't know if you can catch this on the camera, but 19 millimeters is very thick, but the handle feels great. It's thin.
All the handles feel great.
Yeah, and they're not spongy. And but what they did is taper it down. You can see starting right here, there's kind of a line.
I didn't notice that.
And they tapered the...
I assumed it happened lower down at the neck.
Right. They tapered the core down to match the molded handle here. So
I wish Yola would do that.
Yes, me too. So that all their handles, whether or not, whatever the thickness of the paddle doesn't determine the thickness of the handle.
What did you think of the overall weight of this? It has definitely a heavier swing weight feel.
Yeah, I did not try it with any kind of perimeter weighting. I do suspect it would benefit the paddle. I'd probably put it low on the paddle face to avoid becoming too head heavy.
Yeah.
I didn't run the numbers. I feel like it's probably around 120, slightly above.
It's close. I had it at 119 and some change.
Okay. In your mind, or you actually?
No, on the machine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Not unwieldy for an elongated, thick paddle. But if your goal is ultimate hand speed, probably not your paddle choice. Oh, by the way, they also both have raw texture, so raw carbon fiber. It's, if you can see underneath the texture, you have it looks like probably a 1K.
It does.
Twill cloth, so it's not the wider 3K toes. It's carbon fiber, but in smaller threads, basically, which I kind of like the look of. It's kind of fun.
That's
to look
cool.
at.
It's on the smoother side.
Yeah, the grit is on the smoother side for sure. And I've heard some reviewers say that they couldn't get much shape on the ball with this. I didn't have a problem with that for either one of these. I wouldn't call these the ultimate highest spinning paddles. Nothing like the Carbon True Foam Genesis with all that dwell time. But I do suspect that the dwell time on these is also adding to the spin on the ball. I haven't run the numbers, but I'm going to put it above 2,000 RPM, which is pretty good. in my database. Yeah, what did you think about the 19 millimeter?
For me, I preferred the 14. I felt like I could do more by adding weight where I wanted to add weight to it. The 19 I thought felt great, but just too heavy in the hands, too slow.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's because of the Aramid or the Aramid actually kept the weight off, whereas a full foam 19 millimeter might be far too heavy.
That's probably exactly why they went with the tri-layer to avoid the heaviness.
Yep. So, if I wasn't concerned about that or if I had Popeye arms, maybe so. But I really like the 14, the way it feels. And being able to manipulate the sweet spot with some weight was definitely helpful.
Yeah. Did you run the swing weight on this after
I did
you
not.
weighted it
No,
up?
I don't think it's as much as the other, even with all that additional weight.
I feel like it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Still manageable for sure. And I like how you weighted it. I like how this one plays better too. This is my preferred paddle. In a similar way that the True Foam Genesis doesn't feel like a 14 millimeter paddle, this one doesn't either. To me, it feels a little more forgiving, like a 16 millimeter paddle. Now, the shape of these is elongated, but they're leaving some room on the table in terms of the Rule 24, so they're not making it as wide as they could, which is kind of a bummer to me. But
I do wish we had a little extra width on there.
It needs a little extra width. It's under 7.5, somewhere around 7.3. Yep. And stock, the twist weight is a little chintzy. It feels a little twisty in your hands, and the sweet spot isn't as big as it could be. So tell us what you put here for your weighting system.
There are 6 inches of half gram per inch, plus another 3 gram strip at the top.
Okay. So all along the lateral edges, not on the throat, but just the lateral edges, 2 strips of 6-inch long, half gram per inch tungsten tape, and then the lead tungsten 3 gram strips on the top 2 corners.
Yeah.
Now, why'd you go with that?
I tend to hit the ball a little higher on the face, and having a little bit of extra weight up there, for me, really mitigated some mishits.
Okay. Well, with this, I like it a lot. I certainly shored up the sweet spot, broadened it out a bit.
For sure.
I'd say the sweet spot is good on this, better than I expected for a 14 millimeter. I'd put the sweet spot size probably a little above average for what a thermoform paddle in the same shape would be.
I prefer this model over other exact shapes from Diadem in terms of sweet spot.
Yeah, for sure. Same for me. I felt like the sweet spot was overwhelming on this. That's kind of a strong word, but not underwhelming is another way to say it, but definitely above average for me, sweet spot size, and very impressive to me for the Diadem lineup. And this one, in terms of firepower, I was hitting it side by side with my main today, so that's the 11624 Vapor Power, and it doesn't have quite as much oomph as that, even with all this weight. However, it is creeping up on that power category. I'd put it right now, just based on an hour or so playing with it today, in the all court, close to the boundary of power.
Yep.
Okay, that's similar to where you put it. But yeah, I mean, good stuff. It's good to see Diadem, kind of releasing something innovative and a substantial change from anything on their lineup so far.
This is actually a surprise for me. I was not expecting this from Diadem. I think it's probably their best offering to date.
Yeah, I think these are going to be
John, you ever
paddles.
Hit one of those tries where you're like, daggone, that was good. That just came out of my body. It was dead on perfect.
You were hitting that with this.
I had so many drives like that with this paddle where I'm like, that's actually really good.
So it's intuitive for you to play
Yeah,
this
the
paddle.
launch angle is perfect.
Okay.
That bit of kick, top spin at the end, just perfect.
Okay, yeah. All right. Well,
Good
excited
stuff.
to play with the other shapes and thicknesses on these. All right.
Thanks, Diadem.
Let's move on to the bread and butter Filth and new shapes. So I think you've got the hybrid shape, and I've got the elongated and the wide body. They also updated their graphics, which I think is an improvement. I loved the old Filth graphics. One of my favorite bread and butter paddles.
It was great.
I mean, it's one of the classic ones, but I think it is an improvement, and it still has that trippy triple line,
The 3D
effect, kind of blurry when you look at it in certain angles. Otherwise, things. I don't think anything has changed, and if so, it's been fairly minimal.
I was going to say, when you think about, the traditional, the original Filth. Did you notice any difference whatsoever?
So the original Filth was elongated like this. When I
Right.
hit this today, it felt exactly the same as I remembered it.
Brings
just
back memories, right?
a couple of years ago. So it could be slightly different. I didn't hit them side by side. But I was really glad to see that the new shapes, and I hit with this one more than I did the elongated today. So this is basically the fat boy shape, so the wide body shape. And it was a lot of fun. So they're stiff feeling paddles, Gen 2 thermoformed. Great spin, as I remembered having. And the texture's nothing super crazy. I feel like it maybe amped up a little bit from what I remember from the original. But good dip, good spin, and kind of a stiffer
Very forgiving paddles.
feeling paddle. Yeah. And right now, if in terms of where it sits firepower wise in the current paddle landscape, I'd put it all court, leaning slightly into the power realm, but not anywhere close to the power boundary.
Oh, I had it just solid square in all court.
Okay. Yeah. So we're close.
Yep. It's crazy when you're playing with Gen 4 all foam paddles or Gen 3 foam enhanced paddles, and you get used to that feel and the sound of it. Going back to something like this, it's almost surprising, like how stiff these paddles were and how high pitched they were.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
It's definitely a readjustment to what you used to play with.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same impression today. I'm like, oh yeah, these old, this old feel, right? But not to say it's bad. I do
Not at
enjoy
all.
these paddles, and people still love them, and they're going to love them more now that they're offered in better shapes with updated graphics.
Gotta love the white and black. It's classic.
And lastly, today, we're going to talk briefly. I haven't had a chance to hit with these, but you were hitting with them today. So why don't we get your impressions, Eddie, of the 14 millimeter Vatic Sagas?
Well, I had been playing with this 16 millimeter for quite some time.
Okay.
And we actually played in a little mini tournament where I was using this paddle, and I love this paddle. I mean, there are certain things where it can be fairly simple. The technology is not necessarily like over the top. It's not going to win any awards for technology, but done right, what we have out there can be really just more than the sum of its parts.
Right.
And that is the case with this 16, and even more so with the 14.
So you get the 14
Same shape.
today. Yep.
This thing is amazing.
Is it?
It frees up some weight from this, where you can put a little bit more on the outside and
Okay.
just bump up that sweet spot a little bit. You were saying something about core on this yesterday when we had talked. I'm not feeling that this is like supremely powerful. It's if not over the top, but it's the wide cell poly on here just feels so good.
Okay.
There's a lot going right here.
Good. How would you compare the sweet spot stock to the 16? A little less? I mean, is it that
Doc,
typical relationship?
it's about the same.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And even more so with additional weight on the sides of this.
So is that 0.5 gram per inch tungsten?
Yeah, about 5 inches.
Okay. And you're playing with the long handle flash.
Yeah.
That's another thing about these, all of Vatic's lineup. They have just,
There's a shape for everybody.
there's a shape for everybody. So, it's kind of three broad shapes. You have your elongated, hybrid, and wide body. And then within those, you have a short hand, or regular handle and long handle. So this is their V7 shape. They're elongated. This is the
bloom.
The bloom.
Yep,
the
wide
wide
body.
body. Yep. And this is the standard flash, standard handle flash. So this one, this one feels like a longer handle to me than what I was playing with the J2K today. And this one, even longer. Oh, yeah, that's nice. You could fit two hands without having to put a finger on the back. Do you feel like the shorter face of this long handle version
Doesn't impact me whatsoever.
Okay.
Honestly,
you're a
there's
fan.
there's not a lot of paddles I can think of. In fact, maybe just one or two others where I thought the 14 was even as good, if not better than the 16.
Yeah, you're not a huge 14 fan.
They often feel too thin, a little too stiff, but I think this one is a nice combination of power and that wide cell again. Just gives it a nice pocketed feel of the ball.
Where would you put the power compared to the 16?
I'd bump it up a little bit. I would put this at the 14 at the very bottom end of power,
Okay.
and
So
the 16
you
at
think
the
it's
top end of
power
all
down.
court.
Yeah, I heard that the 14 got a PB core. The 14, I don't know if there's a flash or which shape it was, but it got a PB core of 0.44, which is currently legal, but now it'll be sunset next year. I don't think the other shapes have been tested yet, but that's surprising. I haven't hit with this, but hearing your impression of it and many other people's impression of it, it shouldn't be that high. So maybe it was a one-off and they'll get it corrected. Regardless, I mean, it is in the system as 0.44, so, you got a full year if you buy one of these, but just something to be aware of that it will be sunset, at least in its current form.
Regardless, it should be a very durable paddle.
Yeah, it's true. Good stuff.
Good week for paddles. Tell you what, if I had to put these paddles in my bag full time, wouldn't be a terrible lineup.
Which ones?
All of them.
So the Diadem, everything we talked about today?
The Diadem in the 14.
Uh-huh.
The bread and butter.
Which shape?
Maybe that fat boy.
Okay, yeah.
If I should have a day where I just need a massive sweet spot, that'd probably be the one I reach to. And then, that Vatic.
All right. Yep. Good stuff today.
Yes.
Let's move on to a deep dive. So there's no Tales from the Ball Cannon, even though I've been very busy in Kew Labs here with shooting the cannon, but we'll move that to next week. But some pretty big news coming out of UPAA and their laboratory who test their paddles, so Pickle Pro Labs. And UPAA just published a new destructive testing and accelerated break-in standard, which will be effective starting in September 1st of this year, 2025. So all UPAA paddles must meet in this scheme the 0.385 PEF, which is basically PB core, except using different methodologies at Pickle Pro Labs. So the 0.385 PEF standard when new, and then must also not exceed a PEF ceiling of 0.405 after undergoing a standard break-in procedure. So you may be asking, how are they breaking in these paddles? Are they playing with them or what? No, they have a method. So we'll talk about the method in a second. But first, talk about the plans here. So the 2025 plan is using a capped ABI protocol. And again, ABI means accelerated break-in, which is a more conservative approach where each paddle will be broken into a predetermined threshold, which is a function of the paddle's thickness. So some percentage of the paddle's thickness, right? And then ABI protocols will be ramped up in 2026 by removing the ABI cap so that all paddles will be tested until their maximum PEF is achieved and determined. So what does that mean? Well, this year they're going to be only breaking in each paddle to a predetermined percentage of the overall thickness of that paddle and not going any further. Next year, they're going to be like, we're going to break it in until it stops getting hotter and it can't go over, this 0.405, no matter how much crunching we put into it, right? And bending and twisting and all the things they do. So I think that's a pretty good plan, In other words, what this means on the court is you're not going to have opponents across the court who have a advantage over you because they have a paddle that breaks in more than yours does, right? Maximum it can break in is that 0.405 PEF.
So they're going to break it in, watch the power level come up until it dips down, and then that'll be their capping point.
Until it stabilizes or dips down.
Gotcha.
It can't keep going up and up and up.
So I'm confused by this thickness test. Mm-hmm. They're going to basically sandwich it in something until it results in a paddle some percentage of its original thickness?
No. So let's talk about the methods right now. So the methods were published in a new white paper on the PPL website. I'll link to that in the description. The paper's called PPL Accelerated Break-In Procedure. So what they're doing is using a combination of a workbench vise with leather attachments on it and the pickle press machine that measures how much compression and super high detail the paddle is undergoing, right? So they're using this vise in the pickle press, and they're compressing the paddles at increments of 1.5 millimeters in cycles. So with that pickle press, you can, they said it's roughly a quarter turn on the vise. So imagine a big metal vise. They put some leather coverings over that.
Is this the whole face or just a portion of the face?
That's a good question. Okay. And there's very detailed breakdown on where they're squishing it. And they're doing more than squishing it too. So I'll leave it there. Oh, also they're using what's called an edge cycling method, and the paddle is clamped along. So you can imagine they can clamp it with the vise, down to a certain point here until it gets the vise throat is too small to go all the way down. They also go in from the interior or in from this edge. So they're using a vise with like a 5-inch. What do they call those? Like the whole vise itself, where it squeezes things, is 5 inches wide, so it can go down pretty far on the paddle. And they're also doing this edge cycling method, where they clamp it either at the very top, all the way across the top, or all the way across either side. And imagine it's clamped here on the vise, and they are pushing and bending with bending force the paddle at 10 to 15 degrees on either side. So they're squeezing it at various places, they're clamping it, and then bending it to get that bending force, right?
That's going to be some cracking.
Yeah, they did mention several times in the manual that you probably will hear cracking, which is fine unless it breaks the surface of it. So another study they published, the PPL, on the paddle break-in series, is something dealing with trends. It's called paddle break-in trends, and this is just fascinating to me because they have cool charts in here and they can show some actual trends. Okay, so they performed ABI on paddles of different construction types. So they call them different things, or the standardized name, but basically they're Gen 1 cold-pressed sandwiched paddles. Gen 2 thermoform paddles is the second category. Third category is Gen 3 floating cores. So this composite core of polypropylene in the center and edge foam. So the new Perseus 4, the Perseus 3S, YOLO 3Ss, the Pulse V, all these, what we're thinking of as kind of Gen 3 paddles as the third category. And then their fourth category are foam cores. Now, they said it could be all foam, so think True Foam Genesis or 008 or the new Diadems, BluCores, or it can be mostly foam with various minor components for support, whatever. So think Rhombus Ripple, right? There would be also the Gearbox Gen 3s, right? Those would fall in the same category. So interesting stuff. And then they did ABI at various intensities on these, and then reran the PB core, or they're calling it PEF tests, to see. So let's go to our first couple of charts here, Eddie. And first thing I want to say is that they've basically debunked this idea that Gen 1 paddles don't break in or get hotter with use. And what we're looking at here, the construction style 1 is Gen 1 cold pressed paddle. Construction style 2 is Gen 2 thermoformed paddles. Now, each grouping of these bars is one paddle. They're anonymized, so we don't know which paddle it is. But you can see the PB core numbers on the x-axis over on the left here. And then you can see, looking at the scale, the lightest bar is new. The middle bar is after the first break-in, accelerated break-in. And then the second one is after the third bar on the darkest bar. Is this like tan and brown colors? Okay.
No, it's just darker green.
Okay. Oh, it's green.
Yeah. But basically that's our round 2 of testing, right?
So we got 5 paddles here, and we can see different results on the paddles. So one of the cool trends I can see right away, looking at let's start with the Gen 1 paddles, so the chart's on top, is after the first break-in, some of them decline in power. They get lower PB cores, and then they increase on the third ones quite dramatically.
Exploded, really.
Yeah. Now, it's not published exactly what the difference between the first session of ABI and the second one is. I imagine they're compressing it to a greater percentage of the total core on the second one. So they're crunching it in a little further.
It's not a rerun of the first round. It's
exactly
a more extreme.
Well, I don't know. I don't know for sure because it's not published, but that's my hunch. I can't imagine it getting such explosive growth in the third round if all they did was exactly
Some
the same
of these
thing.
were a doubling or more.
Yes. So good points here. So looking at this, like I said, that first trend, I was like, what? A couple of them decreased in power with the first break-in and then saw a pretty substantial jump in the second one. So they're labeling it PB core on the left. So it's PEF. So that threshold currently, the legal threshold is 0.385. And then they said it can break in up to 0.405. So you can see that, the third one over, the first two pass even after break-in. The third one probably fails after the second break-in.
It's close.
Unless it's right at
Yep.
0.405. Last two just explode in exponential power after the second break-in. I mean, the fourth one over was already close to begin with. It was probably illegal to begin with. It exceeded the 0.385. But then it's close to 5. And then the second one is like right at 0.5, which is a crazy amount of power. I wonder which paddles these are.
I'd love
to know. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting because we've always had this conception that the Gen 1 paddles don't really break in. And if they do, sometimes they even decrease in power. And honestly, I've heard stories of like years ago in the APP and PPA, like pros playing with years old paddles that just don't have any grit anymore, but they're totally broken and they're just like trampolines, and there was no testing back then. So I can imagine it is true that at least some of the Gen 1 paddles become hotter with extended use. I haven't personally seen it, I don't know. I'd be interested if anybody who has the Bantam has been playing with it for more than 6 months or so, if they've noticed any substantial break-in.
I can't think of an obvious case where a paddle just seemed grossly overpowered.
No, me neither. So interesting. I wonder which ones of these have that, 2 times or greater than 2 times power increase from new. So, hey, editor John, jumping in here. So I had some time to think about this last night. I wanted to throw this into the video here, just in terms of like this inconsistency of how the Gen 1 paddles broke in so much with ABI compared to kind of my experience with Gen 1 paddles on the courts. So I haven't experienced this kind of break-in with, cold pressed, sandwiched paddles. So it brought up kind of a few concerns that with the ABI process. And one is sort of at a certain point, will compressing a paddle with a vise break it down in terms of the structure of the core more than you can actually do on the court in sort of real pickleball gameplay. So you can imagine crushing a core with the vise is essentially core crushing the paddle, right? In a similar way that thermoforming in the early days before people knew better, the press of the thermoform, the mold of the thermoform would press during heat and pressure of curing the core, the polypropylene core, and then that created kind of a spring, and it broke down very quickly, and the power of paddles on the court got very hot. So you could replicate that with a vise, obviously, on Gen 1 paddles. So it begs the question, where is the point where a vise can compress the paddle more than any situation you could see on a court during real gameplay? So, in other words, is the second bar on these graphs, this middle green bar, compressed to a point that matches real gameplay, but the third dark green bar, is it compressed beyond any feasible situation that could happen on the court during gameplay? And if so, are we putting ourselves in a situation where in a laboratory we can break down a paddle in a way that can't actually happen on the real court, which would put paddle manufacturers in a tough spot, basically having to engineer a paddle that can't break in a way that would happen in the real world. So just some food for thought there. I'm sure that, PPL has thought about this and maybe just hasn't put it into writing yet. But yeah, I just thought I'd throw this in there because it's, an important aspect of all this. Anyhow, let's move on down to the construction to style 2, which again is thermoformed Gen 2 paddles. Wow. Some of these have crazy power increases. So I'm looking at the last 3 over on the far right.
Honestly,
1, 2, 3, 4,
last
5.
4.
Last 4 are crazy.
All from new to round 2.
Yeah.
Just massive.
The biggest jump looks to be about a 500% increase. I wonder which paddle that is. I don't know. But overall, the thermoform paddles have a much greater capacity to break in than do the Gen 1 paddles, which makes sense. Okay. Let's move on to the next set of charts. So we've got Style 3 and Style 4. So again, the Style 3 is Gen 3 floating cores or variants thereof. So, the propulsion core from Yola, the Pulse V core, the 11624 power core, et cetera, et cetera. Very low sample size on this, so only 3 paddles were tested. And then construction style 4, you can see down below, are the foam cores. So that could be like the True Foam Genesis or the BluCore or the Rhombus Ripple.
I'm trying to think of 5 paddles in that category.
Yeah, right. Maybe they use some old, like the Diadem Vice, like a full foam core that never was legal. I don't know. Anyhow, so interesting stuff here. I feel like I'd love to see more in the Gen 3 floating core because of these 3, I can't imagine any of these 3 are going to be the mod TA15, right? You're going to see a much more explosive growth and power after the first and second break-in. This looks pretty moderate to me. Whatever paddles they chose don't have a lot of break-in, and it's not comparable to the break-in of the Gen 2 ones. Right. So interesting there. And then for the construction style 4, foam cores, there's a lot of variation there. And I imagine what we're seeing in terms of that variation is that it's matching the diverse core designs,
Variation, but within the paddle, not a huge jump in power.
Not a huge...
For any of them, really.
Yeah. Not a huge jump in power, which is promising for the all foam cores. I'd have to imagine if the Ripple were in here, maybe it's the 4th one over. I don't think so, though. I think it breaks in more than that. Maybe somewhere below 0.4 and ends up, I imagine, closer to 0.5. That's just a hunch, though. I can't really say that for sure. Yeah, but like I said, a lot of variation in the all foam cores, so the Style 4, but I'm sure there's a lot of variation in the core design, too, from expanded polypropylene, full foam to foam with ribs, and maybe one of these is the gearbox. I don't know. So fascinating stuff, though, and I love it that they are doing the research before they make the regulations here. They also, in the same study, looked at thickness, and I don't have any charts here, but they basically broke the thickness or thinness of the paddle into 3 categories. So it's ultra thin paddles, which are below 13 millimeters thickness. And something in between, and then the thicker paddles is the 16 millimeter plus. And what they showed there with the break-in is that the thinner paddles, so below 13 millimeters, tend to have the highest PB core scores stock, but they don't break in much after ABI. Versus the opposite end of the spectrum are the thicker paddles, which have the lowest of the thickness groupings. PB core scores stock, but they break in the most. So I found that interesting, and it matches kind of the reality that I see it too. I think what's going on with the break-in is when you loosen up the polypropylene or the foam or whatever's inside, it's just creating more of a trampoline, more of a spring effect. It becomes looser and springier, and the more thickness you have there, the more ability to dig into the trampoline and return dwell time velocity.
To that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that no particular design, Gen 1 through 4, really is immune from this break-in effect.
Yeah, true. And like we said, the Gen 4, the all foam cores don't break in as much as I expected, and maybe that's a promising sign. Clearly, this is not a massive sample size, but none of these really show anywhere close to that 5 times multiplier that the thermoform paddle.
But like you said,
showed.
there's variance in that all foam core category, so you can't necessarily generalize a foam core paddle as being, less immune to break-in, or less resistance to break-in.
Exactly. All right.
Really cool stuff.
Anything else you want to chat about here?
I wonder what round 3 would have looked like for all of these samples.
I bet they're working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they'll probably post an addendum. Oh, they do have an addendum in this, or an appendix, I think, where they show there is a correlation. They did deflection testing on all these paddles before and after. And, they didn't want to go into great detail because they're doing a direct test with PEF, PB core, and deflection is an indirect, but there's a pretty tight correlation between what you see with the growth and power with PEF and the deflection scores getting lower, requiring less force to compress the paddle to a X amount of.
But again, these tests are static in nature. I mean, they're being clamped and bent to some degree. It's not what I would consider, like, intuitively how I would do a break-in, which it would be through a more dynamic striking of the paddle.
Yeah.
So interesting they chose this methodology.
Yeah, they do have a machine. I saw it while I was there in their laboratory that fires balls with a cannon at a clamped paddle over and over, and it recycles the balls, and they do test the increase in PEF that way, but they told me this is a far more effective method. Also, when Braden and I moderated the panel at Racketex and had the staff from PPL on the panel, that was one of our discussion questions at the end was, let's talk about this ABI and what's it going to look like. And there were people in the audience, Tom Barnes from Selkirk and Rafa from Gearbox. Rafa was very keenly interested. Everybody's interested in the break-in, as we saw from the videos from the media day at USAP Lab. But Rafa raises his hand and is like, I think this is really important, but I feel like there's a better way to do it. He also he agrees, though, that shooting balls at cannons is not as effective to test break-in. But he has something else. And I think it's more similar to what he's been really emphasizing lately is the need for edge-to-edge deflection. The deflection machines have 2 bars that go under the paddle at 6 inches. And, the paddle hangs over another inch on each side or more.
So it's kind of set up like that paddle.
And that's led to, paddle companies figuring out, okay, if we just put something stiff in the middle and a bunch of foam around the edge, it's going to pass deflection. Anyway.
There's always a workaround.
Right. So that's one reason why Rafa wanted to do that. But he also, I think he's been testing breaking in gearbox paddles using something similar where it's like a 3-point system that clamps the paddle on the edge and you press in the center and get that flexion. Now, I think they're getting something similar by clamping the edge and pushing back and forth on the other edge. They're getting some flexion. Maybe it's not as ideal as flexing from the center, equally from both edges. I don't know, but I do feel like this is producing some good data, and I think they're certainly confident, the PPL, that this is gathering some great data, and they're ready now. Obviously, they've started the ABI program, so promising signs.
More to come, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's well needed in pickleball regulation to have some kind of break-in standard.
How about some Q&A?
Let's do it.
A singular Q&A, but I think it'll lead to some interesting discussion, John. This question comes from Jake. There are some other aspects to the question, but it boils down to, can I get to a 4-5 level without a drive?
Oh, I like this.
I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Because that's what I am, except 4-0.
Without a drive?
No. With only a drive.
With only a drive. You're the opposite, right? No, you've got it all.
No, I think it's interesting. Can you use your strength, and if one of them isn't a particular shot, can you achieve advanced level without a full complement of offensive weapons, let's say?
I really like that question. So I remember one pickleball content creator, I think it was Ed Jew, who basically did that. And he recommended you work on your basics as you're going through your 4.0s, 4.5s up to 5.0 before you even need any kind of real offense, because points are won at these levels, especially 4.0 to 4.5, by letting your opponents make mistake more often than getting winners or setting up winners. We all remember the winners, and those are the most fun things. But there's something to be said about, okay, just get the ball over the net and try to make it not attackable and let them screw up. Is it the most fun way to play? I don't know if I could do that. Right? I love my ATPs and Ernies and drives and everything else, and it's just like it's so much part of the fun of pickleball for me that I don't know if I would be willing just to, for the sake of getting to the next level, just molasses style traditional pickleball dinking.
But I think the question is more than that. I think all of us struggle with a particular shot. It might not be a drive. It might actually be a more molassesy type weapon, right? Whether it be a dink or a drop or whatever. But I guess the question for me is, can you reach a high level, if not the highest levels, without having a complete game?
I think up to a point.
Yeah.
But it's well below the pro levels, I'd say, without having a complete game. I'd say, all right, here's another question, a variation of that.
Yeah.
So who has the better advantage from 4.0 to 4.5? The person with a better drive and no soft game, or the person with a great soft game and no drive and offensive options?
I don't have an answer to that.
Well, let's go to 3.0 first.
Okay.
3.0 to 3.5. I'm going to give the advantage to the bangers there.
Yeah.
Because most people can't handle fastballs at that level.
Agree with that.
I think the advantage still goes to the bangers at 3.5 to 4.0. And maybe not bangers, making like Scott defined banger for me as somebody who chooses to hit the ball hard when hitting the ball softly might be a better option. So I think from 3.5 to 4.0, less bangers, but still the person with a very effective drive has an advantage over the person with a good drop. Maybe. Now, going back inside, sometimes I'll go with my wife Michelle to like one of the rec centers around here, and it's 3.0 to 3.5 level players. And I'm not trying to smoke anybody. It's an opportunity to play with my wife, and I play very nice. I'll put a speed limit. Like I can't go over 10 miles an hour. But that is so effective against that group. Like they don't know. Like you see them banging it against each other, and you drop it at their feet, and they've never really hit a ball, and they don't know how to handle a ball from down low, and they'll pop it way up.
Yeah.
So I might be revising my.
And how often have you seen that even in tournament play at our respective levels, where you watch people warm up, two people, and like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to beat these two because they're just amazing in warm up, but. When it comes down to game time, they're controllable.
Yep.
You can put them in a situation where they can't use the weapons that they are practicing in warm-up.
Okay.
So I think there is something to be said for a little bit more control at the higher levels.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to revise my statement. I think still from 3.0 to 3.5, people who can hit an effective drive have an advantage. I think it flip-flops from 3.5 to 4.0, because what happens is between 3.0 and 3.5, people get adept at blocking that ball back.
Yeah.
And you see that all the time in rec centers, these guys are just banging at these poor old ladies, but they get them back, and and dropping it at their feet at that point is a way more effective method of playing.
Yeah.
So I think dinking
4.5 plus 4.5 to 4.9.
Well, how about 4.0 to 4.5? What do you think there?
I think that's when you start to see a more complete game being advantageous, where it's going to be tough for you to survive without your shots, whether they be drives or drops or whatever. Definitely more as you get closer to 4.5 than 4.0. I think at the 4.0 you could still get by with being a banger.
Maybe. Let me put this out there, though. Let's try to continue the trend from 3.5 to 4.0,
okay,
where an effective drop is a better solution. Can that be the case still from 4.0 to 4.5?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say it has to be, you have to adapt and get better, not only with the drops, but also like targeting the feet of your opponents as they're coming in. Like target the server coming in. If you can get like the drips that just go to their feet, that's still effective at our level, you know. And I still feel like if you can adapt that way, I still feel like that may be an advantage over the drives. Now, also, what are we talking about here in terms of drives? We're talking jack sock level or your standard 4.0 level drive?
I think your standard, you know,
okay.
4.0 to 4.5 level.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, 50 mile an hour drive.
Okay.
55.
I'm going to go with that. Do you agree with that? Like maybe the soft game is still advantageous?
Yeah.
More advantageous?
Yeah, if you can move your opponent around, block those drives into a place where they're not, I think it could be pretty successful.
Now, I'm going to put this out there. You can agree or disagree, but I think from 4.5 to 5.0, you need to have some offensive options in your game.
That's where I think we're starting to see a difference here, and where the original question comes into play is, can you get to 4.5? Can you be a successful 4.5 without power, without a drive? And I think the answer is, the higher you go, the more the answer is going to be a no.
Yeah, true. Yeah, great question. That was really good. I feel like at 5.0 and above, you've got to have it all.
Yeah.
You've got to be great at everything.
But in open play, it's a great opportunity to try your game without a particular shot.
Yeah.
And maybe without your greatest weapon. Develop those other weapons.
Indeed.
All right, that's our question of the week.
All right, I like that one. Good stuff. Oh, did you call out the person's name?
Jake, thank you.
Excellent. Eddie, that was a good episode.
Too fun.
I'm tired. I'm going to take a nap.
Sounds good.
But appreciate you being here. Good to see you again.
Always a good time. See you, John.